Greetings, adventurers. Do you love what Matt Mercer has done for the D&D community, but simultaneously hate everything to do with the Critical Role fandom? Then I have a great story for you. This one's called It's What Jester Would Do, a group of players that watch too much Critical Role. Before we jump into the video, I'd like to announce that Loot Goblin Marketplace has our first sponsor ever, the Ancestral Forge. The Ancestral Forge gives you the opportunity to explore 45 fresh and exciting race-based items to spoil your players. You can pick from the 9 races provided: Dragonborn, Dwarfs, Gnomes, Elves, Half-Elves, Halflings, Tieflings, Humans, and Half-Orcs. One of the key focuses of this book is it offers a wide range of items for each race that can help players find the right item for their characters and create a unique and personalized character. For example, as a dwarf, I'd use the Crown of Stone form. It's a simple metal band that when put on, gives you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, as well as gives you advantages on stealth checks to blend into stone surfaces that match your chosen stone type. Check out the link in the description and use the coupon code GOBLIN for 10% off on your purchase. Now let's get right into the video. This is a story about a short-lived campaign I ran like last year for a friend of mine I will name Sasha and her friends. They were super interested in playing in a D&D game, but they had never actually played a game of D&D. I had some time at that point, so I offered to run a D&D game for them. I worked and created this fantasy world based around a central theocratic kingdom that initially appeared to be a calming force on the continent, but in actuality were evil and were causing problems all over the land and stroking xenophobia to justify becoming a militant isolationist country. When talking to the party, they almost immediately started talking about how they love to watch Critical Role, and I was like, oh, cool, I guess? I've never been particularly interested in Critical Role. I've seen some clips on YouTube and watched an episode where they hunted some frog demon in a circus, but it never really grabbed me. Personally, I'm more of a Dimension 20 guy, but it's not important. I didn't really think of anything of that. Big mistake. Almost any time any of them did anything, they would go on a 20-minute tangent about something slightly related to Critical Role. There was even a few times where they'd be like, oh, this is like that time in Critical Role, they did this. Are you sure you didn't watch Critical Role? No, I don't watch Critical Role. They didn't invent all fantasy world storylines. There was even an instance where players would go to do something and be like, okay, so did you watch that episode of Critical Role where they did this? I'd respond with no, and they'd go, lame. And now one of the players even went, God, this is annoying. You really should watch Critical Role. We're trying to have fun here. Apparently my not watching Critical Role is inhibiting their fun, somehow. Sasha was the worst offender of this during character creation. Sasha began with, okay, so do you know the character Jester from Critical Role? I responded with, kinda. Sasha then goes into detail about how she really likes Jester's personality and she thinks the voice Laura Bailey does is really funny. And essentially, Sasha's character is Jester to a T, literally even down to being a tiefling that is half Ganassi. The only difference was that Sasha's character was half Fire Ganassi. I mostly just brushed it off because in my experience, new players often would rely on existing characters to base their first characters off of. This was a mistake. Sasha would always talk in a poor recreation of Jester's voice, but unfortunately, Sasha is not a professional voice actress, so it was not a particularly good performance and just sounded like a really bad Russian accent. If that was it, I wouldn't have had an issue. I suck at voices too. Almost everything she did or said had the tagline of, this is what Jester would do, so this is what I would do. She mostly used this to justify acting as an airheaded, flighty character that was just the definition of chaotic random. Now, I'm not super familiar with the characters in Critical Role campaign, so someone will need to tell me if this is something Jester would do. Before we get any further into the story, I just want to point out that even if what comes next resembles Jester the character from Critical Role, you as a DM are allowed to have any final say you want. Don't run the game like someone's second-hand account of what Matt Mercer or any other DM really would do. Okay, back to the story. The party was in the governor's mansion of the town they were in and was getting a job to do something about the nightmares plaguing the town. I wrote the governor as this worried little man who is a touch incompetent, and when negotiating with the governor, Sasha gets annoyed that the negotiations aren't going anywhere and says that she wants to, grab the jewels of the governor and twist until he gives in and gives them the pay they want. I immediately tell her no because one of the rules I have at my table, one I mentioned at the beginning of our talks to run this game, is no sexual violence of any kind. Sasha rolls her eyes and says it really doesn't matter since he's a guy. I just remained firm and repeated, of any kind. She just goes, fine, whatever. To answer the DM's question from earlier, no, this isn't how Jester is from Critical Role. This isn't how any character should be, especially when you set a clear boundary and they choose to overstep it simply because a quirky character from another franchise would do it. Allegedly. Anyways, back to the story. This happened a lot. She was a very impatient role player, but also tried to turn every interaction into a personal acting performance since it's what they do on Critical Role. It was a dichotomy that did not work. She would rebound between dragging things out into a slog when all they had to do was talk to a priest about what he thinks is causing them nightmares. It was a Dream Eater monster, by the way, causing what should have been a 5-minute conversation into a 40-minute gallivant that resulted in nothing really happening and ignoring major NPCs and information because she doesn't have the patience to talk to the court wizard for more than 7 seconds. The game fizzled out after a few sessions because I just had enough of them basically trying to turn the campaign into some kind of Critical Role fan game. Much to their surprise and chagrin, not everyone watches Critical Role. TLDR, group of new players that are really into Critical Role, play in a new campaign and try to make everything about Critical Role, and get annoyed at me, the DM, because I don't watch Critical Role. One player just wants to be Jester in every aspect. And that concludes our story. When reading through the comments of this thread, it becomes very apparent that everyone unanimously agrees that this is not how Jester's played. And Sasha, like a lot of first-time characters, falls into the trap of idolizing and kind of misunderstanding how Critical Role is and trying to recreate that dynamic at the expense of the DM. Unfortunately, every player that the DM had in this group all were on the same page, so he kind of felt like the odd one out. But it's completely okay to feel annoyed with this kind of behavior because one thing that people forget while watching Critical Role is it's a scripted show where it's done by professional voice actors who have very clear guidelines of what they want to have accomplished with each other ahead of time. These players have professional voice acting careers, they have theater backgrounds, improvisation with each other is something they can do naturally as they built up this over the course of several years working together on Critical Role as well as other projects. If you want a Matt Mercer caliber Dungeon Master, you need to be a Critical Role caliber player. These are new players, they didn't listen to the boundaries that the DM had, and they mocked them for not watching Critical Role as if that was some kind of metric to indicate if they were a good or a bad DM. I'm very glad that this DM was skeptical even early on and didn't take the player's word for it that this is just what Jester would do and it's totally okay because apparently since he's out of the loop, he's in the wrong. He stood his ground when it came to the explicit scene with the governor, and that's great as well. You have to shut that stuff down, especially if it's something you talked about in a session 0 or just regularly throughout the campaign. Downplaying it because it was a guy definitely is a bit of a red flag. The Dungeon Master had clear communication here, the players appeared to be in the wrong. Some of it's because they're new, but some of it's because they're very judgmental about a hobby they didn't know much about. So keep that in mind if you ever have new players that have a very different idea of what Dungeons & Dragons is versus the game that you're planning to run. That would have been the ideal scenario, but in this case, it kind of went on for a couple more sessions before it eventually fell apart. Hopefully everyone involved will find the perfect game they're looking for in the next one, and I hope you guys like this story as well. If you liked the video, make sure to subscribe to stick around for the next one. In the description below is going to be in my Discord link where you can share your own RPG horror stories as well as answer some Ask Reddit questions I have for you guys. Thanks for stopping by and farewell for now.